let's get into their societal structure.
Yeah.
So goblins are not like bears or like creatures. They are people in a sense. They're humanoids.
They definitely have a society.
Yeah, so they have a society, and so there's a lot to talk about in terms of their society. And their society is a pretty archaic one. It's primal. It's not so cozy. So what would you say?
So about like their society. So basically, there is a social hierarchy in their society.
Yep.
So in the top, there's of course like if there ever is, there's the masters. Those are like the people with the most power. So mostly that would be like hobgoblins, very powerful undead, like lich. Even though they probably wouldn't take goblins because they're so garbage. But maybe like a dragon could because they just can. Or like maybe a powerful warlord orcs they can. So mostly the masters. Rarely it's a goblin king or queen. That's rare. It's actually like there's only one in like every like 200 years, it's like, and then he just dies instantly. But yeah, very rare. So that's the masters.
Because their society is in essence survival of the fittest.
It is basically.
And goblins are naturally small and weak, so
the orc is gonna be
anything that comes in that isn't a goblin will by default be stronger and more fit to rule than a goblin.
That's actually a very good point. It's definitely survival of the fittest. The second social arc are the lashers. These in Goblin Society are the most common, the highest place that a goblin would be. Like they would never be like the masters. So the lashers, given its name, they lash out at the weaker goblins or the weaker slaves. They're getting a little taste of the control. So they're kind of like the commander, or like the captains of the goblin. A goblin.
The sergeant generals.
A goblin chief. He would be a lasher, and so basically, given their name, they lash at people. They normally have like whips or something.
And I would say
their dominance.
The lashers are a big a big force that continues the way that their society is structured because when they were lower than a lasher, let's say, they were lashed, and so that gave them the drive to become a lasher.
Exactly.
And then because they were harmed, that tends to make them want to harm others. And so the lashers kind of continue the vicious cycle of I'm getting hurt and I want to hurt now. And so that's how their system works. It's never going to become let's all be nice to one another. And I'd say the lashers are one of the big systems.
Definitely. The lashers definitely drive the Goblin Society.
Yeah.
But another big thing is goblins are normally hunters and gatherers. So below the lashers there are the hunters. Which, given their name, they hunt things. That's not their primary purpose as hunters. They are like the soldiers of goblin kind. These are the ones that will go out and set up ambushes, attack caravans.
Yeah, if you're a party of players, you're probably going to encounter hunters before anything else.
Yeah, and maybe one lasher.
Yeah,
he would probably be there to order them around. But yeah, so the hunters are the staple troops. The bow is their main weapon, given their name. And below the hunters are the gatherers. So when the hunters do their job, when they take a caravan or something, the gatherers come out and they collect all the stuff and they get the heck out of there. They gotta go fast because then the king's guard are coming in, checking like what's the law's coming in to see what's going on. So the gatherers are the people that pick up the resources around their lair, and when they invade things, they are the ones that take the resources. They're like the farmers, the miners. The gatherers. They gather resources. That's their purpose.
So you may actually, let's say you encounter a village that has been raided. You may encounter gatherers because they'll be there collecting things.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I would say the hunters are probably the most important in terms of like feeding the village or the tribe of goblins, because goblins, they're really all about pillaging, like raiding, stealing, sneaking around, and taking from villages and travelers.
That's a very good point. Like hunters do give like the the goblins like the most wealth and the food. But the gatherers, they just come and they're like, oh, this is the like we pick up what the hunters missed. That's kind of like their purpose.
And when we say hunter, it can be like hunt a deer or whatever, but it's most of the time hunt like someone in a carriage. You know what I mean? Like, and take their stuff.
Yeah, like the warriors. They're basically hunters are warriors.
Yeah.
And the gatherers are the people who come and pick up the warriors' pieces. They they find certain things that the warriors or hunters missed. And the last on the social arc is the slaves.
Rip.
Or the weakest of goblins. They are literally like dirt to goblins. They are treated horribly because they have no power. They're not going to do anything. The higher goblins know that. They can't, the weaker ones are not going to do anything. So this includes slaves. This also includes weak, old, and sick goblins. Yeah. Even in their own social arc. So let's say if your grandfather used to be a hunter and he becomes old, he then becomes in like the slave region, unless he has very important like wisdom for the tribe. Very like if he's needed in the tribe, he'll stay. But if he's not needed, he'll be discarded, and people will treat him like dirt.
And the slaves can also be, it could be your players. The goblins take slaves when they attack.
Yeah.
So if your players do end up losing a fight, perhaps make them become slaves to the goblins as opposed to maybe being killed or something. Although if your players do lose a fight to goblins, that's kind of rough. But they totally could.
No, goblins, you shouldn't underestimate goblins. We'll get into that in a second when we talk about their combat. But I think that slaves is a good ending to their social structure.
Well,
unless you have anything else.
I did want to just kind of put the social structure in a few other ways of thinking about it, just in case, just to, maybe make some neurons fire. So one thing they do, one way to look at goblins is like rats. So in terms of how they view survival in the long term, like in terms of their species, it's very much like reproduce all the time, have a ton of babies, and a lot of them will die, but a lot of them won't because you just have so many. And so this has impacts on the females of the society. Females actually don't do very much else except reproduce because that is what they are expected to do. It is a very patriarchal society where the women, you make babies nonstop, just keep going. That's like what they do. So that is a very animalistic society there.
It is. Yeah.
Another thing in terms of a more philosophical way of thinking about them or more political is that they value the individual over the collective. So if you ever were to take a goblin out of their tribe and analyze them psychologically, it would be all about them. It'd be me, and how am I going to get above? How am I going to move up the structure of goblins? It's not going to be about how can we all as goblins succeed. No.
One goblin would be willing to sacrifice their entire tribe for them just to get a snippet of good power.
Yeah. So
they would do that in a heartbeat.
So if let's say you were in a goblin tribe, it really is just a giant chaotic fighting pit of politics and whoever has more power at the time. So that's how goblins really work. This has implications for how a goblin is raised. So they are taught to be self-sufficient, not necessarily directly, but more indirectly by just saying, all right, you're born, bam, go, you either survive or you don't, right?
Right.
And so if you can play a goblin as a character, but if you're a DM playing a goblin, it's someone that has been on their own since the beginning and has learned they must do anything they can for themselves to get ahead because the only person that will look out for them is themselves. They have never had anyone else looking out for them. So
it's actually kind of sad.
It is sad. Goblins are villains and they're evil creatures, but
they kind of make themselves villains.
It's
their own fault.
They're stuck in a cycle. So that could have interesting implications on a campaign or the morality of how players see things like that. So yeah, I'd say that's That's about everything I have about saddle structure. This is important because this colors who they are, as who goblins are. And you don't want, when you're DMing, to make goblins just these cookie-cutter evil creatures. When there's this entire society that's basically creating them as they are, that you can totally play into to make them more gray as opposed to just evil. They're evil, but they're sympathetic. And so we'll get into more how you can use that to really make them good. But
no.
All right. So why don't we talk about their enemies and allies?
All right. Well, one big thing is they don't really have allies. They're really all about themselves, right? That's kind of like what
I would say they do have one ally.
Themselves.
Well, besides themselves. They themselves are definitely the biggest ally, but I think they have one other that is, I think, a true ally. And I would say it's the wargs.
I mean...
It's kind of like a dog for an owner.
Yeah, so wargs are actually really intelligent. They actually have their own language.
But they work together. Oh, maybe. Yeah, sure. But I wouldn't say that they're enemies.
Well, yeah. Well, no, they're definitely not enemies. But if the goblin ever mistreats the warg's eating him.
Sure, but I think
the goblin just can't be dumb. But they're probably the best allies.
But they do work together so often, and it's almost like if you go to a goblin camp, you will find wargs. If you are fighting goblins, you will probably see wargs. They're together so often that they just work well together. Like, they are allies.
Yeah, no, they're really good allies. I mean, that's kind of like the same when I say about, what if you mistreat a warg, it eats you. That's kind of like the same as, if you, let's say you have a wyvern. You're a good person, but if you do something wrong, the wyvern does its nature.
I guess if you're defining ally as someone who genuinely cares about you, then no, they don't have allies. Yeah, no. But I would say they just have a common interest and almost never betray one another just because... I think goblins betray each other more than they betray wargs. Wargs are animals.
Exactly. No. Yeah. I mean, I guess with the term ally, what we're going to do, what you'll see, who you'll see goblins with, fighting together instead of against each other. But we just want to say that goblins do not care about them. Their allies don't care about their goblins. They don't like each other. They're just doing it for their benefits. But some other examples of who they work with, hobgoblins. They are the commanders of goblin kind. They're generally the masters of goblins. Traditional. You got most evil lords. So literally evil masters. So lich, death knights, maybe demons. Devils. Sure. Demons and devils are rare, of course. Especially the undead too, but any possible evil thing, as I say again, like a dragon, orcs, that's another big ally.
So you have orcs and you have other goblinoids, right? Mm-hmm. Orcs are not in the goblinoid.
Orcs are not in the goblin.
Okay,
but orcs would, if they say a goblin camp, they're like, all right, we got some minions, guys. They'll
right. But this is actually important. So if you think from the goblin's perspective, which is kind of what we're going with on this episode, goblins know that other goblins are not trustworthy, right? Because they themselves, they're self-aware enough to know that they are not trustworthy and neither are others like them. So this creates an interesting thing when you have orcs because you have hobgoblins, like you said, you have bugbears, which are two other goblinoids that are very commonly taking over goblins. Orcs also commonly take over goblins, and the interesting thing is because orcs are not goblinoids, goblins actually trust orcs more.
That's very true because orcs don't have the same mentality. The orcs' mentality are like, let's increase the horde, let's get as many people as we can. Right. So they actually trust people, which is to the goblins' advantage.
Right, but goblins actually prefer orcs over something like someone like bugbears and hobgoblins because they don't see them as like them.
Right.
It's a very weird situation where goblins are kind of like they don't... This again feeds into their unfortunate psychology where they see themselves as these weak little creatures, and so they try so hard to impose power on other things. But in the end, deep down, if you were to put them in a room with Freud or something, they don't like themselves, right? Like they wouldn't like themselves, so they don't like other creatures like them. It's really weird.
Yeah, no. But like, yeah, no, that's a very good point you play. So when you have a goblin camp, maybe like, if there's an orc tribe and a hobgoblin tribe, they would much rather go with the orcs any day.
Right,
They would be like, let's go with the orcs because they're not gonna, just abuse us.
Yeah. Now with that said, they would definitely betray the orcs in any chance they got.
Yeah, but they know the orcs are dumb. Like not as they don't think the same way as goblins. So the goblins have more advantages with orcs than with goblins. Than with hobgoblins.
Yeah, but maybe if you were a party trying to get a goblin to like betray, you may have a harder time if they're led by orcs, because orcs just are a completely different creature.
They are. Yeah.
All right, enemies and allies. Yeah, I think that's all I got.
I mean, they can be allies with any evil lord. That's one of the big things. They can
anything that will basically put them into submission.
Like
they will follow.
Yeah, no, like you could be allies with goblins if you take power with a goblin tribe. Like they would be your ally.
Yeah, you have to rule with fear. But
yeah, rule with fear. Yeah, no, exactly.
Yeah. Actually, speaking of rule with fear, I don't know if we mentioned, but goblins are very scared of death. So.
Oh yeah, no, they are very.
This factors into their drive to have power and such, but they don't have common sense, so they will do things that are very dangerous. But they do very much value living, and this gets into their gods and such, which we may touch on. All right, so enemies and allies, not many allies.